Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is edition two or lesson two of our drum series in Get Quick, Get Sick, where I teach you how to get super sick super quickly. My name is Cryptochronica, and today we're going to talk about making the drum beat that we did last week, quote unquote, move and be exciting and interesting and groovy and worth pursuing as a whole. I'm going to show you all kinds of sweet tricks for that. So, this is what we had done last week. We just did a little bit of basic iterative sequencing, and we got 8 bars together of a very quickly escalating kind of silly drop at 140 BPM for refreshers. This is what we got. Okay, cool. So we have a very, very simple, very basic phrase, and we're going to make it a lot more worth listening to. So what I'm going to do right away is I'm going to start to get things to audio so that they can be adjusted and manipulated in a way that's useful to us, because MIDI notes, honestly, they don't tell us anything about the length, the duration, or even what the sample looks like. I'm a very visual learner, so I like to get my stuff to audio relatively quick so that I can tinker around with it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get these guys frozen and flattened by right-clicking, pressing freeze, pressing flatten, and voila, we have converted these to audio. So I can take a look at these shapes. That kick looks good, but one of the reasons I like to get stuff to audio, especially kicks really quickly, is you will get weird phenomenons in kicks where you have like these really elongated tails that you can't hear, and it just sounds like a click or a sort of a low rumble. And when things are in audio, it's so effortless to boom, cut it off and deal with it yourself. So say I want a really quick kick, now I've got one like that. I just faded my tail into existence. So this kick is actually working for me. It's not doing anything unprogrammed, so I'm going to leave it as is. Another great thing about getting stuff to audio quickly is the older verse trick. So if this is like so, and I copy it and paste it over here, and then I right-click it, oops, sorry, I'm going to double-click it, and then press reverse. Now I have a little bit of a tail suck up into my snare. Cool, sweet. That's a little bit of a shitty pre-transient. We're going to talk about pre-transients, I think, in our next series. Yes, we're going to get super deep with kicks and snares in the next series, and I'm going to show you all kinds of cool things for layering them up and making them have their own internal grammar within this phrase that we are building. But I've gotten these to audio so that I can see what they're doing. And I have also gotten this whole section of our drum beat kind of volume balanced. So we're going to talk a little bit more about balance as we go forward today. But again, I'm leaving leveling and general track balance for a mixing series that I'm going to do later. So let's get these hats moving, because right now they are super artificial sounding and super fake, even though we have put in a little bit of velocity adjustment. That is not gonna cut it. So today we're gonna talk about getting stuff off the grid and getting a little bit of groove and rhythm and width out of our shakers and our hats and our crashes and our rides and all those higher frequency instruments. So our kick and our snare are just placeholders. We're going to replace them in next episode with some super good sounding high quality kicks and snares. And I will show you how to do that. But first, let's get our hats off the grid. Actually, no, let's first get our snares off the grid. So I've talked about this before, that if you don't have that natural sort of like vibe right away with your drums, it doesn't matter what you do later on in the process, you will not have that. So it's important to build your track from the ground up where things are correct the first time you do that. And that kind of relationship needs to be immediately established between the hats, the kick, the snare, and the sub, which fundamentally constitute your rhythm section. That is what people dance to. Nobody's dancing to poetry. Nobody's dancing to lyrics. Most people don't dance to leads. They might dance to a huge chord stack, but fundamentally that's the sub that's kind of filling out that space with air and causing our chest cavities to vibrate, which is what we're in this for. We all like being vibrated. Okay, so I'm going to get our snares ever so slightly forward in the track, and there's a couple ways to do this. In breakbeat music, especially in like dubstep and in house, so on tempo music as well, on beat music, you often put your snares a little bit forward. It can be really pleasing, and it just kind of snaps things forward a little bit. It gives us a little bit of that shoulder swing. So there's a couple ways to do that. The first thing you can do is you can just get to a small division of the bar. So that's 1/64. If I pull this here, 1/64th of a bar forward, it's going to be really noticeable and really, really swung. And I don't like that. It's too much for me. Again, it's just an idea, so I'll play it and you can tell me what you think. Listen to the snare. Way too noticeable. So I like going to smaller divisions. I just press Command Z to make that go back. And now I'm going to get in there. I'm talking like 1/128th of a bar, or even 1/256th of a bar. So I can just drag that guy over and voila, I will have that. And I find that that sounds a lot better. But there's another thing that you can do. And sometimes it's fun to find your groove with the other thing that you can do. So I put that back by pressing Command Z. And instead of just taking the whole thing and dragging it off grid, which is something that works, and you can do this in Logic, you can do this in any sort of DAW, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to these, and each of these little icons reveals and hides a different aspect of the project itself. So if I press the R, my return tracks, which are these guys, actually go away. So if you need to free up a bunch of real estate down there, that's the way to do it. M is the I don't know what it stands for, but it's this thing that you use to record and send things to sends, et cetera, et cetera. Today, what we're going to look at is this D, and this D is automatically off, and it's not giving us the D. I'm going to give us the D. So I'm going to open up the D, and what we're going to have is this timing template come out, which allows us to adjust in milliseconds where the track will fall in the grid. So if I want to be if I want to add a few milliseconds forward, what I can do is I can come up just a couple milliseconds forward, or if I want them to go a few milliseconds back, I can come down 13 milliseconds and it will be shifted 13 milliseconds back. Now, the problem with this is it introduces, in this case, it introduces exactly 13 milliseconds of latency, because as the track is playing, Ableton needs to read this and then slow everything down in order for it to catch up and kind of adjust things. So I'm gonna just, I'm gonna kind of wing it, kind of listen to it. I'm gonna put that back in 0, and I'm also just gonna grab my kick and my snare and just kind of feel what sounds decent to me. So that's really robotic. It's really on the grid. So I'm just using my mouse, or I'm using my arrow buttons to go up and down with this. I'm gonna go forward because I like my snares ever so slightly forward. That's nice. So again, it's so subtle. You get used to this. Honestly, I like it. That's pretty quick. Let's do something a little bit more extreme. Let's go to like 23. It honestly sounds like it's slowing my snare down. I think I got that backwards, you guys. Actually, I'm pretty sure when you put it up into a positive amount, it's actually slowing it down. Oh, that makes sense. It's adding, duh, of course. I didn't become a producer because I can do math. It's adding milliseconds to it. So we want to take milliseconds away from it. So let's come down so it's actually going faster. Let's try that. Sorry about that, people. Here we go. Oh, yeah. That's definitely faster. Yeah, I like that. -4 is chilling for me. So we're going to do that on our snares. I'm not going to do anything to the kick. The kick is one of those instruments that should stay on beat unless there's a very clear and direct intention behind getting it off beat. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode when I talk about doing kicks in a really deep way. So for now, I'm going to just leave them on here. I've got my snares a little bit offbeat, and I want to get my hats offbeat too. I like my hats either pretty slow behind the beat, especially in hip hop and in trap, but I also like them fast in kind of these up-tempo genres of music. And we're kind of making a bass-heavy, dubstep-y track, so let's do something a little bit faster, shall we? Let's try that. I'm gonna try just these 3. I want to get that groove making me go back and forth. Cool. That might be a little bit too slow. Oh yeah, that works better for me. Again, it's subtle. You'll learn that as you go. You'll pick it up what works for you and what actually works. So I like that 11 milliseconds fast. I'm sorry, slow. And this is -4 milliseconds fast. All right, let's do the same thing with our shaky shakes and get these guys. Let's have these ones be a little bit faster. So I'm just going to come up just a little bit, you know. Not as much as the snare. I don't want them to land on the same time, but That's cool. That works pretty well. All right, sweet. I want my crashes on the downbeat, so I'm not going to introduce any of that to them. I want my open hats on the downbeat, at least for now. Okay, so that's the first thing that we can do to introduce a little bit of offbeat sort of groove and rhythm. Another thing that you can and should do, especially with your hats, is under packs. In your core library, under swing and groove, you have a variety of different grooves that Ableton and the producers over there have been so kind to do for us. Swing is an incredible thing that you can introduce to just about any MIDI instrument that will subtly slow things down, usually the second note, and that is what gives something swing. So just doesn't have any swing. If it's been swung. That second hi-hat is pushed off the grid ever so slightly, which gives it a funky sort of natural feel. So if you go to 16th notes, you can pick the amount of swing that you want to apply to whatever instrument you apply it to. So 0.5 is just barely strong, and something like 85%, that is super swung and super noticeable. I don't know if I need that for this track. It's great in funk, it's great in house, but right now I'm doing a bass heavy track, so I don't necessarily need the hi-hats to be that distinctive and distracting. I want to do a lot of that kind of dance stuff with the bass, and we're going to talk about that later. But in this case, I do like either of these. So I'm going to double click that, and that's been sent to my groove pool. I'm going to also double click the 1615 and the 1625, so I have some choices. I'm going to put them on and figure out which one I want. And again, I just double clicked it, they went to the groove pool. So now in the MIDI clip itself, I'm going to consolidate this whole segment. So now it's all one thing, and I'm going to double click it. And in here, in the section that says groove, I can commit these grooves to my segment. So I'm going to start with the 5 and see how that sounds. Not very noticeable, which is kind of the point. Subtlety is great in drum building, and it's also less is more in electronic music. As a general rule, less is always, always more. Just trust me. We'll talk about why in another episode. All right, so 16 out of 15. 16 notes swung 15%. Let's try that. Oh, that's tasty. Yeah, that's tasty. I like that one. And let's try 25 for really dramatic swing. Let's try over here this time. Yeah, it's a little too much on the fast ones. That's actually really nice on the quarter notes too, or on the eighth note. So maybe I will have 16th note swung 25% on this first section, and then over here I'm going to kick it down a lot because I want that much more artificial, fast sort of feel that trap does really well, and you'll see why, what I'm going to do that's going to make it awesome and work really well. All right, cool. So that's at 16th. It's 0.5, or what am I talking about? 5% swung. All right, chill. Now with our shakers, let's give these the one that we didn't use. Let's do 16, 15, and this one will also be 15% swung. And I'm not even going to listen to it. It's going to work or it's not. We'll figure it out later. Okay, so that's the first thing. Or the first thing was getting things off the grid ever so slightly. We moved our snare forward, we moved our hi-hats back, we moved our shakers ever so slightly forward, so things are not completely on the grid. Now, I want to do some other things to make these hats deep and make them move and feel not like a typewriter, because there's nothing worse than drives me crazy. It also sounds like shit, so do not do it unless you know exactly what you're doing and you're making very intentional tracks, which does that stuff all the time. You can do it if you know how to. All right, so what we're gonna do first and foremost is we're going to add some movement to our hi-hats. So in the modulation tab of this sampler, I have all these different LFOs that I can apply to different hi-hat parameters and play with things. LFO 1 is awesome, but limited because you can only assign it to the volume, to the panning, to the filter, and the pitch. We don't want that for this instrument. What we want is we want to apply it to some other free things that are not included in these 4 little tabs. So I'm going to turn on LFO 2, and I am going to go to the random setting. So it's not a sine wave where it's happening. It's not going to follow that motion. It could be be all over the place. It's random. And for this trick to work, you have to have it happening really quickly. Another thing for this trick to work that you have to do is turn off retriggers so that it's not triggered every single time the MIDI note hits. So this random sort of LFO, it's going a little bit here, a lot there, a little more here, blah, 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 blah. It's moving all over the place at random intervals behind the sampler. It's never triggered again. It's just constantly running, and that's what retrigger off does. So now I'm going to assign this to my pitch so that it's slightly it's slightly higher or slightly lower in pitch with every hit. Now I'm going to put that on 100%, so it's super dramatic. You can't miss it, just for demonstration's sake, but I would never do this because it sounds so crappy. So I'll just play it so you can hear what I'm doing. Okay, what we want to do is we want to introduce that ever so subtly to our hi-hat. So it sounds like sometimes our drummer is hitting the hi-hat edge, or sometimes he's hitting it a little bit closer to the bell, sometimes he's hitting it off to the left, so that the pitch is changing ever so slightly, but not enough to be noticeable in a tacky, cheesy way like that was. So I'm talking here, I'm talking people like maybe 4%, maybe 0.25%, so slight. Okay, right here at 4% is where I'm hearing it. We don't want to be able to hear it. We want it to be happening without being noticed. So I'm gonna come down even more. Let's try that. Cool. I can't fully discern it, which means that it's happening, but it's telling my mind that it's happening, but it's so subtle it doesn't feel noticed, and that's the key. All right, so that's the first thing. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to send it to our changing non-retriggered LFO on random, going really fast, happening all the time. We're going to send that to the sample offset. Now, what the sample offset is in my sample tab. The sample offset is where the sample is triggered. So that could be a position, that could be a position, that could be a position, that could be a position if it was up 100%. And obviously from here to here, there's no information. There's no sample, so it's just going to be silence. So we have to be careful with the sample offset because we don't want it to be so offset that when the MIDI note triggers the sample, nothing happens. That's utterly pointless. So we just want to introduce a little bit of sample offset. So sometimes it starts here, sometimes it starts here, sometimes it starts here. So again, it'll feel like this sample is many different samples starting in different places. So I'm going to go to hats, going to go back to my modulation tab under LFO2, sample offset. I'll put it on all the way just so you can hear. Some of them are silence, and then we're going to dial it in. And yeah, oh my God, all of those were like nothing. We're like just not even making noise. Try it again. Yeah, okay, no, not what we want. So I'm going to come down to 0, and I'm going to have the sample offset also just be a really little bit of amount, because we kind of just want this sample starting here or here or here or here or here. But any further than that, and it's not giving us a hi-hat, so we don't want to cut off too much of the sample. So I'm just going to try that. Oh, chill, that works super well. Okay, so 2.74 is a good place for that. And you know, sometimes I go up to like 8%, but you don't want to push it too hard. All right, cool. So we have that, and that's the first thing that we need to do with this hi-hat. I also want to go over to our filter global, and I'm going to go over here where it's panning, random panning, and I'm going to turn this up. And if this is super high, again, it's too noticeable, and therefore it doesn't work. And what this tab does is it sends the sample to a different space in the stereo field at random, so it's not controlled. So I'll play it with 100%. Yeah, it's all over the place. It's like no drum set ever because you don't have 15 different hi-hats that you're hitting in different directions. That's not how a drum set is recorded. So I'm gonna go much less and maybe just put on like 7 or 8% because I do want it to move a little bit just so that it feels unpredictable. There's nothing worse than a perk hitting you in the ear right here, like, hey, 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 I'm over here on the right. We don't want that. We want things to be moving. All right, cool. So we have that hat now with these snares and these kicks. sounds so much better. And that's only the first thing we've done. Oh, we're going to get so deep. All right, cool. So with the second thing, I'm going to duplicate it because I want these same modulations, the same panning in there. I want these same pitch and sample offset modulations on our hats. And this time, I'm going to set this one off to a little bit left or a little bit right. You know, not all the way left and not all the way right, just a little bit. So 20% is a pretty good place. And this one, I'm going to pan in another direction, a much further amount. So we'll do that about 35, maybe between 35 and 42%. We don't want it all the way 50% because that's too much. And too much is terrible. So now we have that. That's the first thing I'm going to do. So now we have two hats in different locations, poking out in different parts of the stereo field. And let me pull up a plugin that will let you envision the stereo field in a way that might make sense for beginners. Isotope, where are you, my friend? Oh, Isotope, come on then. There we go. So the stereo image kind of looks like this circle. And if something like this kick is playing, the kick is in complete mono. And what that means is it will be completely down the center, like that. It's a line happening down the center, which means both of the speakers from left or right are hitting it with all of their power. And now things in mono is really, really desirable. We want our, we'll talk about all this in mixing, but we want some things in mono because when something is in mono, that means the speaker is able to dedicate the most amount of electricity to that one specific thing, which without it spreading it in some weird stereo way. So it's not off to the right, it's not off to the left. Both the right and the left speaker are completely committing all of their energy to that one push. And that's great for kicks, but not perfect for kicks. And we'll talk about that in mixing. I just want to show you the stereo field. So now these hi-hats, if we had left those hi-hats without, if I had left those hi-hats without being panned, I'll go back and put it back to not being panned. If I had that at 0, now remember, it's going to move around because we have random panning on, but if the panning was actually 0, this hi-hat's probably in mono, except for the occasional times that it randomly pans. So let's take a look. Okay, so this hi-hat's actually got some stereo width. That's why the highs are kind of like blooming up like that. But you can still see the fundamental line. This isn't the best sample to show you. Never mind, scratch that. Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it later. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go back to 20 left. And now that this one's very clearly off to the left, and this one's been panned much more to the right, they're moving all over the place, but I feel like I can hear that pitch shifting. So I might come down and pitch a little bit more. Do not want to be able to notice that pitch shifting. It sounds super janky. Cool, let's try that. I am still hearing it so slightly, so maybe I'll make it even less, but right now I can live with it. So that's the first thing we're gonna do. We're gonna pan them in separate directions so that one's like tick, 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 and the other one's like over there, doing different things. It's the first thing. Second thing is I'm going to actually spread them in time as well as in space. So I'm going to make it, this one a little bit faster than this one. Remember, this one's been delayed 11 milliseconds. This one's only being delayed 4 milliseconds. And now, because they're not hitting at the same time, it's kind of like, this one's a little bit further back. They're going to feel even wider. So let's try that. Oh yeah, it feels way wider. I'm sorry, I understand some of you guys can't hear that stuff yet. Let me play it a little bit longer. So this is at 11 and 11 when they're both on time. Now listen to what happens to that hi-hat on the right side when I slow this down or speed it up or whatever. It feels present now because it's not landing at the same time. It's like one's like tick and the one after it is like tick. It's a little bit after, so it's like, and that makes it, that little bit of delay in time makes it feel much wider. So now we have hi-hats that are worth keeping. And I'm gonna go back down here and I'm gonna press, I have this limiter here mapped to the key map 1. So I can turn that on and off just by pressing, I'm not clicking anything, I'm just by pressing 1. So I'm gonna turn that off and kind of rebalance the two in volume. Your hi-hats should be full 12 decibels quieter than your kick and your snare. So I'm gonna get my hi-hats to minus 24 decibels because both my kick and my snare are set at minus 12. And I want those to be 12 decibels quieter, so I want them to be minus 24. But That's what this one was at by itself. This guy was there at minus 24. I'm looking at the master channel. Look at that, just about minus 24. Now that I'm doubling it up with this other track, I've got to re-level it. I've got to rebalance it because together they're going to be louder. See, now it's minus 21. Not what we want. That's too loud. It's going to hurt our ears once it's been compressed by a limiter. So I'm going to grab them both together. I said both together. Thank you, Ableton. Just read my mind already. Come on. When's AI going to take over the production process for me? Just let me think my music into the machine. All right. So I've got both of these selected at once, and now I'm going to come down with the fader, which is a no-no. I'm going to come down with the fader until we're at minus 24. I can click that little icon, and it'll regenerate the volume. So I want this to be about minus 24 together. So I'm going to keep coming down on my fader until they're about minus 24. And maybe a little bit louder, because it's averaging at its loudest minus 23.4, but I know most of those hits aren't quite at minus 24. So I might shoot for minus 23 instead, because I can also see those two bars are not coming up to the same volume threshold. My right hat is ever so slightly louder. That's why it's louder on the right side of the stereo field. That's what this means. So the right side is a little bit louder than minus 24, and my left side hasn't even quite hit minus 24 decibels. So I think that's probably balanced. Minus 23.1 is probably balanced to an average of minus 24 decibels. That works for me. Again, we're going to talk all about balance and leveling, and we're going to talk about so many things, you guys and you girls and you everybody in between. We're going to talk about so many amazing things, and we're going to talk about balance in a later episode. So I'm going to hold off on that. But right now we're shooting for minus 24 with those hats. Chill. Okay, so those hats work together. Now, I said that it's a big no-no to be adjusting volume and to be adjusting panning using your faders. That will get you laughed out of the studio because it's an amateur mistake and it's really sloppy and really messy. So I just needed to do that to see what volume decibels I need to come down. So I'm going to use the trusty old utility and put in minus 2.2 right there, copy that over and put it in right here. And then I'm going to put both of those back at 0 because I am not an amateur. All right, so now we have that. Now, onto the shakers. We want to do the same thing with those shakers. I'm going to first put on a little bit of the random panning. Again, not much, don't want to overdo it. I'm going to go into the modulation, turn on LFO2, go to the random LFO setting. We don't want a sine wave. Make sure it's happening super quickly. I'm going to turn off the retrigger so that it's constantly running behind the sample. It's not being triggered to start anew. And I'm going to put on the slightest amount of pitch adjustment, and I mean slight. Oh, 1 is probably too much. I want to get in between there. I want to get 0.25. So subtle, everybody. All right, oh, so subtle, bruh, so subtle. All right, and then the second thing I want to do is, what did I say, sample offset? Yes, that's right. So let's take a look at our sample, shall we? I'm gonna put up the zone tab. In this little button, when you click that, every time you press play, the sample will be triggered out of your loop. So I've pressed this. So now that's the sample that's coming up. This is the one that's being played. If that wasn't on and I could click that, if I press play, you won't see it. So that's just a little thing to visualize what you're doing. So this sample, I don't want it to start here. That's too much. Don't want it to start there. That's too much. But somewhere within this whole volume increase is a good place to start. So maybe that's like, ooh, I don't know, like maybe 8% of the entire sample space. So we don't need to come up more than 8% in our modulation tab. I'm gonna close the zone down, get our real estate back. So I'm gonna just come up, you know, maybe like 2%, just a little bit. Oh, it sounds so good. Chill. Now I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to slow one of them down so that they are slightly delayed from one another in time. And then we are going to pan them and rebalance their volume. So one is to the left, to the left. The other one we're going to put off to the right. Chill. 13% is good. I find that this trick works better for a large stereo spread when one isn't so far out and one's a lot further out. I feel that it works a lot better. If you want them both to be far out, what happens is it doesn't sound like the same instrument anymore. It just sounds like two separate instruments, and they stop talking to each other. Okay, cool. So we have that whole situation. I think we're probably ready to freeze and flatten these peaks down to audio as well. Let us just take a gander. Let me first rebalance them. So shakers are much quieter than hats. You want them to be anywhere from like minus 30 decibels to like minus 26 decibels. So I'm gonna solo them together, and that's minus 18. That's a no, no, no. So I'm gonna select both of them, and I'm gonna come down until we can get to a desirable place with these. So keep coming down, keep coming down. Minus 24 at its loudest. Let's come down a little bit more, so it's like minus 25 at its loudest. Yeah, maybe a little bit louder. Minus 7 decibels. Yeah, that's perfect. Oh yeah, right on. All right, cool. So now I'm going to come into here, and I'm going to put these both back to 0 decibels, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to adjust it in the actual sampler itself. So 25 minus 7 is 32, so minus 32 is our golden ratio. We're going to do the same thing on this one, minus 32. Maybe I should do the leveling video next, because I'm sure so many of you are like, how do you know these formulas? It's electronic music. There's formulas. That's the great thing about this. It's all been done before. All we have to do is copy the greats. I will share these formulas with you. Just subscribe. All right, cool. So we have that whole thing. Let's play that together. I'm going to guard your ears. I'm going to turn that limiter back on by pressing 1. Here we go. Cool, that works a lot better. I'm not happy with these hats, so I'm gonna go in them after we've frozen them, and we're gonna do something way better. So let us grab these. Let's grab this crash, which is 2 alternating crashes, and we're going to freeze and flatten all of that now that we have done it in a slightly more complicated, more nuanced, more natural feeling, deep way. And pardon me, I can also close down this because I want my real estate back and I don't need to see the divisions of it. So what I don't like about this, oh, also because I've frozen and flattened this, you can see my groove has nothing on it. I have baked that groove into the MIDI notes. So when I put on the 16 swung 5% divisions, that has been baked into this audio. And so it's permanent now, it's been affected. So that is what we need to remember. These are swung 5% and the shakers were swung 15%, but this first one was swung 25%. So I'll keep track of that, you don't have to. All right, cool. Now I think these hats are just ridiculous and there's just way too much. So now that it's audio and I can see what everything is doing, it's really easy to just cut stuff out where I don't like it. Yeah, this is stupid. That's a really dumb place for that. So I'm gonna just copy that one over. And I kind of think that's stupid. It's not very exciting. So I'm going to copy this one here and then this one. Actually, no, let's do it so that the M pulse is on this offbeat right there. And let's give us a space right here. And let's give us a space right here. Chill. You know, we can honestly copy that like that. Let's try that now. Much better. And then this is silly. I don't think we need that because we have this other open hat in that position. We don't want to get too crazy. Cool, that works much better. Sometimes all you need to do is introduce a little bit of silence. Silence is an instrument, and we're going to talk about playing silence as an instrument in a later video. Okay, so we've got some hats that aren't terrible. We've got some shakers. We've got some crashes. Now, a great thing about having crashes is you can reverse them so that they lift a little bit into the next section. So this one's big release is on this downbeat right there. I'm going to take this part of the crash, and I'm going to copy it over here like so. select it, reverse it. Now it's going to lift into this secondary crash. And the reason you want two flavored crashes alternating is so that it's not just like a that's not the instrument we want. We want a so they're different sounding crashes and they contrast from one another. All right, so we've got that one. I'm going to take this, I'm going to put that there, and I'm going to reverse over that. Now when I repeat the beat, we have a little bit of an ever so slight subtle lift at the end. But those crashes aren't the only crashes that we can do. We can also put in crashes on the offbeat, and this is a great way to increase your rhythmic patterns by adding a new voice in a position that is as of yet unoccupied. So we have our basic sort of drop segment. So we'll call this drop 1A. How about that? Oh, adding locator, we're going to call this drop 1A. Now we need a drop 1B. And the best way to do that when you have a fundamental foundation like this is to just select it all and copy it over. Cool. Now I'm going to put in add locator, drop 1B. So we don't want drop 1B to be exactly the same as drop 1A. We want there to be rhythmic increases and energetic increases so that our interest isn't completely expended on drop 1A. We want there to constantly be a growth in interest because that's what keeps drops interesting. Duh. All right, so on this one, when we have drop 1B, what I think we should do is we're going to introduce, are we there yet? Yes, we are. Yeah. Okay, we're going to introduce a new position, and that position is the offbeat. So if we think of the drums in positions, we have position 1, which is our kick, and then we have our snare, which is in position 2. Our offbeat would be position 3, and that is exactly equidistant between the kick and the snare. So house music, it works when it's boom, cat, boom, cat, boom, cat, but it really works when it's boots and cats, right? Boom, scats, boom, scats, boom, scats. We want that kind of feel, and that is what the offbeat is. And this is a relatively new addition to dance music. It's something that's only been around in the 20th century, and it's what happens when you fuse African calypso beats with European sort of melodies, is you get these incredible fusions. So it was a very Black American take on music and on drum playing that introduced the offbeat as an impulse unto itself to things like jazz and rock and swing in particular. Swing music was like really the founder of all of that. And you know, these are the original genres that laid the groundwork for hip hop and funk and disco, and then much later on trap and bass music and stuff that is all very, very, and house, of course, that is all very, very dancey. So this convention hasn't been around that long. It's only been around, 100 years, and yet it works so well that we find it in the EDM world all the time. So let's recreate that convention, shall we? I'm going to create a new MIDI track, new MIDI clip right in between my kick and my snare, which is otherwise known as the offbeat. So right there, and I am going to put in a, nope. Ooh, that's sharp and terrible sounding. Let's make sure that volume isn't going to destroy your ears. Turn those off. Is everything correct in here? Nope, it's not. There we go. Okay, let me turn that down a lot because cymbals are so sharp and they hurt our ears so badly we don't need them to be loud. Oh, that's not making any noise at all. Why aren't you making noise? What's going on? Maybe I came down a little bit too much. There we go. What the heck? What the heck, guys? What's going on? Why aren't you making any noise? Why is that doing that? Oh my goodness. Come on, friend. What are you doing? Why are you not triggering? That is unacceptable. Okay, why not? Okay, screw this. I'm going to close this down because that is very annoying. User library crashes. Let's find, let's just do that, drag and drop. Okay, I don't want these pitch envelopes or those pitch shifters in there. Oh, so loud, ow. Okay, minus 24. And that's still probably too loud, so I'm gonna pull up a utility after that, audio effects, go away and utility, chill. So let's just see the volume on here. We're shooting for without the limiter on it. So I turn the limiter off, that's coming in at -26. We're shooting for like 10 decibels quieter than that. So like -36. We're gonna go to like -34 so we can hear it really clearly because it's not gonna be limited. So let's come down 8, -8. Yeah, maybe -7. -7. Sweet, that works. I'm also gonna pan this off to a side. We'll start in the left. Why not? Start in the left, go to the right. How about? Okay. Sweet. So on the offbeat, the certain instruments work a lot better, and crashes they're really great for releasing energy because it's like all this white noise is just spraying out, and that's great for releasing energy. But when it's constantly happening, not only can it hurt your ears, not only can it clutter up your highs, but it's also just a little bit much. So other instruments, other cymbals work a lot better, namely the ride and the finger bell. Those are like the two that just work all the time. But another great one is it can be like boom, eh, boom, eh, boom, eh, is that vocal like eh kind of noise works super well, or the hey, like tambourines work if you want to do like indie music. All that stuff works really well. So I'm going to find something better than a crash. There, that's a ride. A ride's a lot nicer of a sound, and it's not so overwhelming. Isn't that pleasant? All right, cool. We're going to duplicate this so that it's going over. And because I'm doing iterative sequencing, let me start it again. Because I'm doing iterative sequencing, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to change one little thing. And in this case, what I am going to change is I could change the volume. I could make it a little bit louder using this velocity tab, or I could change the voice by picking a different a different cymbal. So it could be like that, but I like this cymbal. So what I'm going to change about this is its swing, is its rhythmic position. And I'm going to have this one be ever so slightly forward. So I'm going to come into 256 grids. I'm going to pull that like that. Boom, easy. So that was my iterative sequence. And go away, little clip. All right, now that I have this full bar, I'm going to consolidate that. Actually, I'm going to consolidate it here, and then I'm going to duplicate that over. Now, if I was keeping with iterative sequencing, I would change that again and do something else. I will, but not in this position. I'll show you what I'm going to do in a second, because iterative sequencing is important to make your phrases really work. But right now, maybe I should. Yeah, okay, I guess I will. Let's get deep on cymbals. So, okay, so I've duplicated it over. Now I'm going to change one thing. What should I change in this case? Well, I like to pitch my crashes ever so slightly so that they do slightly different things on each hit. So if my first one is no pitching and it's just a rhythmic change, and I duplicate that over, I'm going to have my second one have a little bit of a pitch shift. So if you go into the sampler, you can right-click this transpose button and go to Show Modulation, which opens up this modulation tab over here. And I'm going to talk about this so much when we get to subs, because this thing is the shit. But in this particular case, what I am going to do is I'm going to lift the end of this second sample. Actually, maybe I'll scratch it down. I'm going to scratch it down for 5 semitones. And I'll put a little bit of a curve on it. So now it's not this. It's, oh, isn't that interesting? Cool. So that works really well. Now that I have that whole shebang, I can consolidate it, duplicate it over, and change one thing. So in this case, I think what my change is going to be is I'm going to have that one that slides down happen again right here, and I'm going to take it away there because I do not need it there. And the reason I don't need it there, because we're looking ahead a little bit and we're playing with the other voices. The reason I don't need it is because here I have a cymbal lift pulling us into this next part. So we don't want two high frequency cymbals, one going down and one lifting, to happen at the same time, because they defeat the purpose of each other. So I'm going to look at this and want this piece to talk to this piece of the cymbal. So I'm going to give this guy some space to shine through. It's like that diva needs a little bit of space on stage for her voice to come over the chorus and to show everyone what they're there for. So that is going to be my iterative sequence in that case. I'm taking away some of that, using silence as an instrument and freeing up some space. Now I'm going to duplicate it because that works a lot better. Let's make sure it's on the offbeat. Sweet. And if I wanted to do an iterative sequence, I could change something else. Oh, should I? Should I? Okay, I think I'll do that. I know, very risky. Okay, so we have this crash now. In context, we've got this. Oh, I'm going to turn on the limiter so you hear it. Sweet, cool. Now that we have that, let's get deep. So when we get deep, we do the old dupe and loop. I'm going to duplicate that whole segment. And this way, those pitches that I did are still in these secondary symbols. Now I am going to do the same thing with the timing, where this one is ever so slightly either late or early so that it stands out in contrast. Let's have it be a little bit late. Oh wait, so that's the other way, right? Yeah, that's right. Let's have it be a little bit late. I'm just picking a number here. I'm not going to obsess over this. Obsessing over little tweaks is just not worth the time. And we're going to have this one be panned off to the right. Let's go much further out. Let's go 37. And then I'm going to introduce what is called, actually, I'm going to first change the shape. So this in the filter global is the shape of the sample that's coming out. If I had it all the way down, we'd only get this little shape. We'd only get that first little tick. See? It's basically a hi-hat. Now, if I open this up, it kind of fades down and it gets quieter. So it's almost like I'm getting just the bell. Or if it was all the way open, I could have the attack higher so that it kind of whooshes up. It's kind of like a, oh, maybe a little bit more. Come on. There we go. So now that ting, first sort of transient impulse, that tick isn't there. That little ticky hi-hat noise isn't there. And it's just the shh, 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 kind of like a shushing noise or like a white noise breathing in the background. Oh, that's so nice. It's just ever so slightly like throbbing in the background. And we want that kind of throbbing feeling because that in itself, you can see what my body is doing. That throbbing is lift, that throbbing is energy, it's bounce, it's a dance. So a little bit of throb on this second one is chill. And it's different now, but I'm going to do something else. I'm going to go back into this pitch oscillator tab, and instead of playing with the pitch, which as you remembered, I got to by accessing the transpose, right-clicking, and going to show modulation. That's how I got into this pitch modulation key. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to this oscillator, and I am going to oscillate a little bit of FM synthesis into this pitch to give it a slightly different timbre or tone or voice. So in this case, I'm going to open it up all the way. And look, this is modeling. This looks exactly like that filter thing looks. So this is the shape that my FM synthesis is going to get. So if I have it open all the way like that, it's going to be all FM synthesis, especially when I turn on the volume. So that would sound, this is it without any FM. And now if you turn up the volume, you'll start to introduce a little bit of sine wave FM synthesis into this sound, and that will sound like this. It's probably not going to be very pleasant. It sounds kind of weird, right? You can come up in coarse. I'm going to actually turn that attack down a little bit. Cool. So it's making it kind of rattle. It's got like a that's kind of cool. But I don't know if I want sine wave FM synthesis. So you can pick any of these different waves to oscillate into your sound as an FM signal. I'm not going to get deep into FM today, but I'm going to just do a little bit of white noise. And white noise is really harsh, so you don't want it to be super loud. I don't feel like it's affecting things that much. Why are you not being super noticeable? Let us see if that will make a difference. So I'll put that attack back on in a second. You know, it's not doing much because I don't think there's a lot of body to this symbol. And because there's not a lot of like lower tone body in this signal, So this is what our sample looks like. Because it doesn't have any lower tones, it's not going to get much of a reading in the FM synthesis. So I think just a little bit lightly done is probably our course of action. So a little bit of noise, just to change up the voice a little bit. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to put on that attack. So it almost sounds like a roar or a crash of white noise off to the right, and it is out of our way. Now, blended with the other cymbal, you hear it's slightly delayed and it's doing something slightly different. We don't need that to be as noticeable, so I might come down to -30 here, because we want them to be a little bit off kilter. And that attack is a little bit distracting. It's too noticeable. Cool. Now it sounds like the bell is hitting on our left, and then the fade out is happening on the right. So it's like we've pulled in this direction. It's like, and that adds to a dancing mobility. Again, it's all about pushing and pulling. Now, we don't need it to be super obvious because there's other drums there, but I do want this to occupy a larger space than if it was just this. That is not the same as that. It feels wide. It's like, but it's wide, but it still leaves all the space in the middle for our other instruments. So let's try that now in context. Sounds so much better. Try it. Let's listen to it without that second one that's been slightly oscillated with a different voice and slightly off time. Close down this so that we get our real estate. This becomes really noticeable, and it also doesn't have that same width and that same sort of feeling like there's this throbbing kind of white noise floor rising up beneath us. So let's try that. That's so tasty. Okay, cool. So we now have the same, segment copied over here for drop 1B. And what we're doing to sort of escalate intensity, I'm gonna turn on a light, hold on. Okay, cool. So now we have this drop 1B repeating, but instead of feeling like a repetition of this whole segment, it's adding another rhythmic component with the offbeat. The offbeat has been added, and so it's now filling position 3. In the beginning, we have position 1, and we have position 2 occupied. Now we're introducing position 3 on that offbeat, so it's another rhythmic component. And that's really cool, that's really great. But where do you go from here? Say we have this whole thing doing that. Oops, what am I doing? And we select it, and we, come on, friend, be on the grid. There we go. Now, if I duplicate that over, we're gonna feel like as these open rides get out of our position 3, it's gonna feel like a major decrease in energy when we restart the beat right here, because we're going from these fast hats at the 32 beat, 32 grid, we're going from these fast hats back down to those eighth note hats, which are much slower. And we're losing this sort of washy kind of cool rhythmic thing that's happening on our offbeat. So it's going to feel like a huge decrease in energy. How do we overcome that? And I'll show you. Where'd all the energy go? What am I dancing to? So there's still a little bit of energy there, and we reintroduce it slightly by bringing up the shakers. Now, if we were going to do a breakdown or a verse, and we want to clear out a lot of that higher frequency energy so there's room for the vocals, or we want the focus to be on another instrument, that's fine. But really, the best way to keep increasing energy is, instead of adding or subtracting more voices, it's to add or subtract more rhythms. Now, we're going to start to talk a little bit about what's called basic polyrhythms, and polyrhythms as a whole. And when you use these combinations of filling your positions, so here positions 1 and 2 are occupied with some hi-hats, here positions 1, 2, and 3 are occupied because we've introduced the third position rides there. What we want to do is we want to introduce some polyrhythms in this section so that it feels like there's still an increase in energy. Because here's a secret, people. The secret to human nature, at least as sound is concerned, is that we are predisposed towards optimism. I know it's completely unlike our whole world in every other regard. But as far as sound goes, any change in rhythm, even if there is a de-escalation of the higher frequencies, any change of rhythm is still going to be perceived of as an increase in energy. It's a crazy phenomenon, but when a new rhythm pattern is coming in, you can model people's brains, and what you'll see is that their active listening turns on and that they start having to learn the new rhythm. Even though all kinds of voices have been cleared out of the way, the new rhythm is causing them to think actively and is causing them to have to learn something. And while you're learning, you're thinking, and therefore you're increasing your focus. So we as producers constantly want to trick the human mind into having to stay active as it listens to our music. Our first trick was the big old drop. Our second trick was introducing some higher frequencies to speed up the energy. Our third trick is doing the same thing by taking this out and then switching up the hi-hat voicing so that it is continuing to be, it's keeping the energy high. Trick 4 is reintroducing those shakers. Then what we're doing here is, after we have our big crash moment, we're tricking the brain with a new rhythmic element by inserting position 3 rides. Cool, you get it. And then we reintroduce the shakers. You know, these shakers actually might serve us better right there. So we'll do that. And then I am going to also introduce some polyrhythms. So we have this breakdown section here where it feels like we're going to lose a lot of energy. So let's make that really apparent. We'll keep those open hats, but let's take these shakers out. And we're going to put these shakers over here like this. So that we have this whole space here where it's going to feel really empty. And we're also going to keep these hats kind of slow. So that way, when we increase in energy at this second part, those hats are going to really bring it back in. Yeah, we'll do that. Maybe not. Maybe I'll have the shakers fill in that space, and then we'll introduce the hi-hats and then introduce the shakers for maximum escalation of energy, because we constantly want to be escalating. We don't want to be revealing everything right away and letting the cat out of the bag right away, and then let everything kind of taper off in excitation, because if it stops growing in excitement, then you've already heard the best part of the drop. So we need to trick the human brain to constantly be growing in excitation, or excitation, however you say that word. So at this part right here, we've got this big old moment, lots of stuff happening. Where'd everything go? It's so empty feeling. It feels so empty. So let's introduce what's called a polyrhythm to make it feel like there is some new exciting element. Now, I'm going to use perks, for this because I find that they work really well. So I am going to show you a basic polyrhythm. Let's think. I'm going to show you, so a polyrhythm is when you are not counting the same time signature as the rest of the track. So our track is in a 4/4 time signature, and without getting into music theory too much, what we want to do is we want to count instead of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and we want to be counting in threes. So instead of doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we want to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, where we emphasize that third note, that 1, or the third, whatever. We can impulse it wherever we want and put our emphasis wherever we want, but we want it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This one, this hand is doing something on top of the 4/4 time signature, and you get all these crazy interweaving rhythms and grooves that you can't get otherwise. So let's do a simple 3/4 polyrhythm. I'll name this one 3/4, and then we'll talk 4/5. Isn't that interesting? And I know, or I'm sorry, 5/4. 5/4 polyrhythm. We'll even do let's even do a 7/4. Oh my goodness, it sounds so complicated and so confusing. Trust me, I'm going to show you tricks that make this so easy. Okay, cool. So 3/4. If I pull up a Go away. Go away, little clip. If I pull up a MIDI clip and I size it to the grid of 1/16 notes, this works really well. Polyrhythms tend to work really well in 8ths, 16ths, or 32nds. Otherwise, they get really unwieldy. So we're going to do something in 16th notes. I'm going to find a perk that I like here, right on number 1. Perk, perk, perk. It's the chicken of perks. That's chill. That'll work fine. Okay, cool. So what a polyrhythm is, if I was going to do just a basic rhythm in 4s, this is 4/4. This is 4 to the floor. That's knock, 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 knock. It's literally 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, we don't want that. We want 1, 2, 3. So what would that look like? I'm going to get rid of these, and I'm going to basically space 2 between each. 2 different grid lines between each hit. So it's 1, 2, 3. You see? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, etc., ad infinitum. It's such an easy thing to do. You're just counting in 3s instead of 4s, and I'm leaving 2 spaces there. I'm going to make sure that they're all the same volume, and then I'm going to play that back for you. So it's still knock, 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 but it's not knock, knock, knock on 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we hear that over the other instruments, let's extend this and keep it going a little bit. Let's go to, I'm gonna go, so it's 16th grid bars, and I'm gonna go there. Gosh, why won't you stay like that? Thank you. Okay, cool. So now I'm doing it every 2, so that we're counting in 3/4. So I'm gonna play this on top of our beat. And you're going to see how this new rhythm feels really fresh over, even though everything else is decreasing in energy. So let me make sure this volume is accessible. Turn off the limiter. So -13, that's too loud because that's as loud as our kick and our snare, which, as you remember, were -12. So we want this to be a lot closer to going out of the master channel, like between 24 and 18. So in this case, we'll do -18 because it's got a little bit of a lower tone. So -5 dB should bring us to -18.3. Perfs. All right, chill. Let's play that. And let's pan it a little bit. Do that. All right, here we go. So we've got this. Limiter on. Okay, cool. So that is introducing a new rhythmic component there. It's a little bit wonk right now. And I think the reason it's a little bit wonk is because if polyrhythms don't repeat, they get super, super hard to follow. So we're going to make this segment repeat a little bit more. So I'm going to try it again. Let me duplicate it. So that would be 1 repetition. Technically, it's repeating there, but I still think that might be too long for our brain to follow. So it's not working for me, this first part, but I think the second part is working. So what I want to do is I want this second part to be my 3/4 rhythm, but I want it to repeat. So I'm going to just do it like so. And now we've got something that repeats every single time. That's easy to follow, right? You can get it, and you can see how this is dancey now. The other thing that I'm hearing with this and why it doesn't work is we don't need it to land on our snare. Our snare is occupying position 2, so we don't need this to occupy position 2. In fact, it's getting in the way and conflicting with our snare. So we're going to use silence as an instrument and kill that shit. All right, let's try that. Oh yeah. Cool. So if this was our first thing, actually, I guess that technically would be our first thing, and we duplicated it over, we would want to change one thing because we're trying to keep with iterative sequencing. So we always want to do the old dupe and loop and then the old change. So with this one, I think I'm going to change it. I'm going to do this because I think that could be cool. And I don't think we need those bratas. Let's try that. Oh yeah, because that lift is covering that spot for us. So cool, there's our sequence. We changed a couple things and it works so much better. So that is what we have now. And if we don't like this voice, the knocking is kind of shitty. Let me find something better. Oh, those are fun. Okay, let's do that. And then I'm going to show you an idea that I would have if I did that. So we have the rhythmic thing established, but we don't need these voices established. These voices are happening 3/4. And that's cool because it's happening in combination with our 4/4 time signature. So we have two rhythmic things interweaving with one another, and they're not happening at the same time the same way. So let's make that even more pronounced by changing up these voices. So we've got that kind of sound. Let's do a kind of sound. So that the second one is a little bit different, and that is how we get drum diversity. Now, diversity in your drums is critical to keeping your drums interesting, just like diversity in your diet is critical to keeping you healthy because it's a well-rounded diet with lots of nutrition. And it's critical to keeping your tongue happy because nobody just wants to eat French food their entire life. Nothing wrong with French food, but you don't want to eat it every day of your entire life. This is why there's other kinds of foods. So diversity keeps things interesting. There's a saying, diversity is the spice of life. That is the most true saying ever in your drums. So let's try that. I don't like it. I just don't think I like these voices very much. So let me find something better. I'm not trying to play ping pong. Let's do the old clapperoo. Doesn't work either. Let's do this. That's cool. That way that impulse is kind of, that one's got kind of its own impulse, and it's kind of, this row is speaking to itself and this row is speaking to itself, but they're still talking to each other. So let's try that. Nice, that's super cool. That works for me. All right, so that's a 3/4 time signature. Let's also do a 5/4 and see if we can get something that we like out of that. So I'm going to make a new phrase, MIDI. So Shift Command M makes a new MIDI track. 32s, let's do it in 32s. Why not? 32s work. Normally they're a little bit too fast, but polyrhythms, we're not playing every single note. So let's try this. So let me find a sample. That's cool. That works fine. And now for 5/4, as you can imagine, like 3/4, we're putting 2 spaces between it. 5/4, we want to put 4 spaces between it. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, and that's the one we want to emphasize. So it's technically 5 spaces from 1 to 1, or 4 spaces between the two. But we don't need all these other little friends, so we're going to kill them. All right, now we're going to find 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Sweet. This is how you do polyrhythms, and it's literally the easiest thing in the world, everybody. Just please don't be intimidated by them. They're so worth it because they will make your music so much more interesting, and like genres like trance and house are defined by their use of polyrhythms, especially when you have your kick that's just going over and over and over again. You need polyrhythms to constantly escalate and de-escalate the interest in your song. So we're going to do it all the way across. And now remember what I said, it gets unwieldy. It gets hard to follow when they happen too many times. So if this was just going to go on forever, it would get really, really hard to follow. So I'm going to just do this and listen for kind of what works. See, it's so fast at 30-second notes. I might actually slow it down. Oops. So I'm going to select that whole thing. Why aren't you doing that? Okay, I guess I can select them all. Oh, there we go. Now that's super fast. So that I divided the time in half. That's what the divided 2 things. That's the multiply 2 things. So I'm going to multiply it twice. Cool. So now it's wider, or now it's slower. Okay, I hear what I like already. I'm going to have that loop right away because I think that is a followable bar of time. It's not confusing me. And I'm going to duplicate it. Or actually, I won't because I'll do some iterative sequencing. So let me consolidate that, and I will show you what I like. I like this. Those are the 2 that I like. I think we don't need this because that's where our kick is. Our kick's at position 1, so we don't need that to happen. This is kind of still having the crash fade away for, so it's just kind of out of place. So let's kill that one. Here, the ride, or that open hi-hat is really noticeable, so I don't think we need that. That is cool. Now, let's get rid of that. I think that is our winner. So I'm just using a few of these notes, but these notes are on a 5/4 time signature. So it's two rhythms happening at once, 4/4 and 5/4. You know, and this friend, I think should be right there. And I know that's not 5/4, but I think that's where it should be. Oh yeah. So it gives it a lot of swing when it's offbeat like that. Maybe it should be offbeat. Yeah, you know, it should be. Let's just find a different sample. That's a nice little knock. Ooh, bucket sound. I love the bucket sound. Nope, it's off. It's too noticeably off. Okay, so you know what we're going to do, guys? We're going to fix this. I'm going to actually put that back so that it's on the backbeat. It's in a different position, and I think that's just going to work for our timing better. But at least we have these first two that are in the 5/4 counting. So that is interesting. It's different than it was before. That works way better. Yeah, that works a million times better. So cool. We have a different rhythm. And you don't have to have, like I was saying, you don't have to have every note on the 5/4 rhythm. You're just generating new rhythmic combinations by having something start at the 5/4. So both of these times that I made polyrhythms, what I did, as you can see, is what I did is when I made, oops, let me duplicate this. So I'm going to get rid of all that. But what I was doing is I was starting right on number 1. I was starting on position 1, right here, right where that kick is. And then I was counting over in a different grid. We'll go to 16ths. I was counting over a bunch of spaces. So if it was 3/4, it would be 2 spaces between them because it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. But I'm still fundamentally starting here. And that's starting on position 1. Now, that doesn't necessarily work every single time. So after you've built your polyrhythm like this so that it's, this is a 3/4 polyrhythm, I should change that. When you've built a 3/4 or any kind of polyrhythm like this, starting at position 1, sometimes that gets overused, and also sometimes it doesn't give you something new. So we have that position starting at position 1, but maybe it should start here at position 2, which is where that snare lands. Oh, actually, that's the position 3 at the offbeat. So if we have it start here at position 2, this is going to give us a different combination. So I'm going to show you what they would look like if they were continuing. So let me loop that. That's looped. And let me, goodness gracious. Let me go all the way out over here. Let's do that. And I'm going to duplicate this, boom, to make my point, because that's important to me. All right, so if that starts at position 1, this 3/4 starts at position 1, it's going to only occupy those slots if we continue our polyrhythm forever. Now, if we started at position 2 and we continue it forever, what's going to happen is we're going to get an entirely different combination of things over our 4/4 beat. You can see that this is not lined up. These are in different positions. This is not lined up. So sometimes it's good to push your polyrhythm from position 1, like that, all the way back to the snare and have it start at the snare, which is position 2. Of course, you can be experimental and you can try it on position 3, so the offbeat. Now, what we did the very first time with at least the 5/4 one is we started it on position 1, and then we filled in the spots and took stuff away. In this case, this 3/4 beat, honestly, I think I started it on the on like this half of an offbeat, which I don't really call a position, but it works there. So that's where we started it, and that's what worked, which means that our position 2 rhythm, polyrhythm, is still up for grabs. This position hasn't been occupied yet. So maybe we should use that for the 7/4 time signature. Boom, boom, 7/4. Now, as I'm sure you can guess, what does 7/4 look like? Pretty easy. It's got 6 spaces between it. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, etc., etc. 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Boom. Okay, I guess I'll go looking for that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oops. I think that's it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1. I'm confused. Maybe I'm not doing that right. Maybe it's supposed to be 7 between each other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, no, 6. 6 is right. Okay, cool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sweet. So that is 7/4. And I'm going to turn this one off because sometimes polyrhythms don't complement each other. It's usually better to focus on like 1 or 2 at a time. So let's just try that over our beat. So it's getting unwieldy about here because it hasn't repeated. And I know that this first one doesn't need to be used because that first one is our snare space. So let's actually have this continue all the way out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. There we go. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. All right, cool. That's the whole polyrhythm sequence. And I can duplicate that across. Now, if I really wanted this to work, I would have to I'd have to find a place to repeat it. I think this is probably a good place. Let's try that. And let me hear that now. And we know that this first one isn't working because that is on our snare. And they're competing for attention in position 2. So that's cool. I really like that. But where's our snare? Oh, our snare is there. So maybe just before the snare. That's kind of cool. That's nice. Oh yeah, that's totally fine. We don't need it on the snare. So that's kind of what our thing would be. So it's not happening on that snare. So I don't know if I need any of these other than that first one. That one's cool. Or that last one, I mean. I kind of like that one too. That one's chill. All right, you guys got to go though. You're not helping us. All right, so we're going to mercilessly kill those things that don't help our production be sick, because that's what this is about, sick production. I'm going to duplicate that over. Why didn't that copy exactly? Oh, yeah, okay. All right, because it's a polyrhythm. All right, sweet. So now we have that position filled with the 7/4 polyrhythm, which is a time signature of 7/4 over 4/4. Oh, that's why this isn't working. Sorry, everybody. That was silly. Now we've got now it works way better. Cool, that works super well. And now all this other stuff is coming in, which is regenerating our energy in the track, because even though the hi-hats are staying at that same pretty slow tick, 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 tick speed, we're bringing in the shakers, and we're also bringing in the position 3 offbeat crashes. So if we really wanted to space up and speed up this area, what we would do is we'd introduce another polyrhythm. So I'm going to turn that one on, but I don't want to let the cat out of the bag right away. So let's just bring it in that second time, and I'm going to put this right, yeah, like that. You know what? This 7/4 is not active enough, so we're going to have that one come in. We're going to have that one come in afterwards, and we're going to bring this over here, because I think this 3/4 one was the best one that we did. Cool. There we go. Now we have an entire drop. We have a whole sequence. And if I really wanted to escalate this drop early, right off the bat, what I could do is, instead of having 2 full segments of these 4-bar or of these 8-bar drops, if I wanted to just get straight to the point really quickly, what I could do is I could do that same kind of thing, but kind of like this. So that would be kind of quickly coming in, and then we'd have that one happen, and then we have them both happen together. Oops, not the 5/4. What am I doing? Go away, 5/4. You're not welcome in this party. You're not cool enough. All right. So that's something that we have to do as producers, is constantly throw people out of our track because they're just not cool enough. And we need our tracks to be the coolest damn things that they can be. All right, cool. So let's get rid of all this nonsense. Goodbye. And now we'll just use this as our full drop now that we've generated everything. So you're going to see all kinds of crazy things accelerate and de-accelerate because we've kind of compressed it. We've kind of made it shorter. So here's the whole sequence together, and then we will call it a day. It's basic polyrhythms. Anything else I want to cover today? Reversing cymbals. There is one more thing I want to cover, but I can do that with deep snares and deep kicks and deep hi-hats, even though we kind of went deep with hi-hats already. All right, cool. Let's just play it. Cool. So you can feel how this has a phrase. It's got like this drop moment, and then we introduce the polyrhythms and the sped up hi-hats, as well as the shakers, which is constantly rising. Here the shakers come out, so we drop a little, and that's to introduce these polyrhythms. But we still are introducing a new rhythmic component, which because of natural human optimism in the sound, in the field of sound, that rhythm makes our natural optimism feel like an increase in energy. And then after we conclude this, this new segment of the polyrhythms, we slow down our hi-hats again, and we're bringing in the offbeat cymbal crashes. And that is another rhythmic component because we're occupying position 3. Position 1 is the kick, position 2 is the snare, position 3 is those rides. And then I added a little bit more excitation with this 7/4 one because I really like the way this plays off the snare where it hits just before the snare. I think that's kind of a cool feature. I think that's a really nice kind of little perk hit. So I just duplicated that and put those in, and I'm going to do the same thing over here because I like the way that hits before the snare. And now it's not exactly a 7/4 time signature anymore, but it's still interesting enough that it's adding to our optimism. And then I bring back that 3/4 polyrhythm on top of brought back shakers, on top of hats that have increased in energy. So this last part is our maximum energy, which is great. We want to get to maximum energy just before we have our big release of that energy in our breakdown. And that's where our breakdown will be occupied, is right after our drop. So we'll have a build up here, we'll have our drop that unfolds in phrasing so that there's something constantly introduced that's elevating our attention and elevating in energy and excitation. And then we release all of that right here with a big old breakdown where we say some cool shit like, damn baby, that was so good. You know, something like that. So again, last time, and then I'm signing off. Here we go. As simple as that. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Get Quick, Get Sick, where I teach you how to do both those things. And I will see you next week. Love and peace. Aloha for all.